A lot of people say that life begins at conception, and a lot of other people disagree. Some people think that life begins when the heartbeat starts. Some people say that life begins with the first brain waves. Some people think that life begins when the baby is first born and breathes its first. Some people think that life begins after that. Some people actually support abortion for babies that have already been born. So what is the correct answer? Because it's either, there must be an answer to that. So I've done a lot of thought about this, and especially considering the spiritual point of view, which a lot of people are really do not take into account, including even Christians fail to take into account more often than not. So let's actually dive into what that means. So first of all, when does life begin? Does life begin at conception? Is kind of a dumb way to ask the question. It's not even asking the right question if you think about it. Well, when does life begin? Well, a sperm cell is alive, an egg cell is alive. Nobody would dispute that from a scientific perspective, but on the other hand, sperm cells and egg cells are dying all the time, and nobody thinks that's much of a tragedy. So clearly life is not the actual criteria that we're interested in here. That's not the most important thing. So what is? Well, I would posit that it's not the life that is important, because if an amoeba dies or if a sperm cell dies, that's not really a tragedy. It's when does it become a actual human being, and what does it mean to be a human being? What differentiates a human being from a single-celled organism? And in talking morally too, right? Because we don't have the same reaction if a cow dies or if a worm dies. Right, that wouldn't be if we were to step on a worm, that's not considered murder. The same way as if we kill another fully formed human being. So when exactly does an embryo, let's say, turn into a human being from a moral perspective? Well, I would posit that what makes a human being is not the physical apparatus, but the spiritual. It's when does that body have a soul? It is the soul, it is the spirit of the human being that makes the human being human, that makes the human being have that transcendent value. Now, if you don't believe that humans have souls, then you have, and we're just a big conglomeration of cells that's just going to disappear after we die. Well, you have a hard time really having any framework for thinking about this at all. There's no point in if one of the pro-abortion arguments you hear a lot of times is, oh, it's just a clump of cells. Well, if it's just a clump of cells, are you also just a clump of cells? Your body is made up of cells. You're just a bigger clump of cells. What is the difference there? You can't. It's very difficult to have any kind of moral framework if you have a materialist mindset. You have to recognize that human beings are spirits that are currently inhabiting a human body. So the question is not when does life begin? The question is, when is the spirit fused with or coupled with the physical body? Now, once we have that, once we define our terms, then we can go and actually answer that question. And there is a science to how the spirit world works. And there is a science to how the spirit interacts with the physical. Because if you can recognize that a human being is a soul with a human body, and it is the soul that it has the thought and the will, right? Because if after you die, most people recognize this, that after you die, your soul will go to some place, whether heaven or hell or purgatory or wherever else. And in that place, it will be able to think, it will be able to feel, It will probably be able to communicate in some way, and it will be able to make decisions. So those are all faculties of the soul, not of the body. And yet, we are able to think, or we are able to will, we are able to create an action, and our body carries out that action. Well, clearly there's some, and also we're able to think, and our brain chemistry reflects that thought pattern. So clearly our spirit in some way is interfacing with our body, which is made of physical matter. So there must be some sort, like there is a science to that. And modern science has not figured this out yet, at least not very well, or at least not the public-facing science, which I won't go down that rabbit hole just yet, but actually there has been quite a lot of science on the interaction between the spiritual and the physical, but it's been largely buried. If you would like to find the single best resource that I've ever found on this is called The Spirits Book by Allan Kardec, which really details a lot of the interaction of the spiritual and the physical and how the spiritual world works. And one of the things that you learn is that this coupling of spirit with body is a process. It's not something that happens in the blink of the blink of an eye. It's not like, okay, the egg and the sperm meet, and then all of a sudden, bam, the spirit's right there and it's fused with the embryo. It's actually a long, drawn-out process that takes quite a while. That actually, from a point early on in the development in the womb until after birth, until the baby is about 7 years old, then that's a long process of the spirit merging with the physical body, fusing to the physical body. And during that process, the spirit, at the very beginning, the spirit is much more living in the spiritual world and gradually becoming more and more and more physical, which is why you see that children, like babies, are sleeping constantly. They're not very, and when we sleep, by the way, and we dream, and this is true with adults as well, we're more in the spiritual world than we are in the physical. Well, babies are sleeping most of the time, so they're in the spiritual world most of the time. And then children grow up and get a little older, and they're seeing imaginary friends and things, and like they're seeing things in the spiritual world that adults don't. And at about age 7, then they're completely fused with the physical. They're completely living in that physical body more than they are in the spiritual world. So the question then is, well, would you kill a 6-year-old child? I mean, we're going back to the abortion argument, hopefully the answer is no, although I wouldn't put it past some people. But yeah, it's a process. The child is not complete. The soul is not completely coupled with the physical body until about 7 years old. But that process should not be interrupted. And obviously, and especially because it's a process. I mean, think about this. This poor spirit has been working hard to enter this physical body to start this life, and you're gonna cut it off halfway through? That's a horrible thing to do to this spirit. Now, you might ask the question, okay, but when does it start? So, and another answer to the question, by the way, if you say, when does life begin? Well, if life means the spiritual life, well, it actually begins before conception, right? I mean, if you believe in the Bible says that God knew you before you were formed in your mother's womb. Or I think it even says before you were conceived. So you existed, your soul existed before conception. So it's not, it's a matter of when does the soul meet the body? When are they merged into one? Now, modern science has shown that an embryo being the egg and the sperm, before it's reached, I don't remember the exact terms, but it's like after a few divisions, it becomes a blastocyst, and then at some point it becomes a fetus. These are like terms of development within the womb. And modern science can create an embryo from, well, not create, but we can take an egg and a sperm in a petri dish and fuse them together, and they become an embryo. And still in the petri dish, without even being within the mother's womb, that embryo can be split. And this happens naturally too, by the way. That's where identical twins come from. It happens naturally in the womb that there is one embryo, and then somehow it splits into two embryos, and each of those embryos grow into a distinct person. This suggests to me that life does not, or the soul fusion does not begin at conception. It begins somewhere afterwards, just because it doesn't really make sense that you have a soul that's combining with this body, and then all of a sudden the body splits. And then what is the soul going to split? No. The two twins are two distinct individuals that don't have individual souls. Right? So my best theory on this, and also another point, is that a embryo can be frozen. You can freeze an embryo for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then unfreeze it, and then implant it into a woman's body, and then it will begin growing. I don't think that you can freeze a person's soul. Like that, it doesn't make sense to me that you would be able to freeze or split this physical material, and that it would just, like, that would, I don't think that it has begun at that point to fuse with the soul. What makes more sense to me is when the embryo implants. And by the way, the majority of fertilized embryos, that is an egg and a sperm that meet together and form an embryo, naturally, the majority of them don't ever implant. They don't survive more than a couple of days. Right? So I don't believe, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that there would be these souls that are attaching to these embryos that have like a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 chance of survival. What I think is going on is that when the embryo implants into the mother's womb, and then the mother's blood starts going into the embryo, to me, that would seem the most likely point at which the fusion of body and soul begins. Another thing the Bible says is that the life is in the blood. An embryo, before it is implanted, does not have blood, but as soon as it implants, the blood of the mother starts flowing into the embryo. So that's my best guess as to when the actual fusion begins. And at that point, like I said, the obvious implication is that this human spirit is merging with this body, and if you destroy its body, then that's a horrible crime. That's murder. This is the body that belongs to that spirit at that point. Even though it hasn't been completely merged yet, it is in the process of merging. And if you in many cases, and especially if you read like the literature, like the Spirit's book, oftentimes it's a massive undertaking for this spirit to have this body and to have this opportunity to come into the world. And this spirit may well have chosen the mother and the father to be his parents and to raise it, and has entrusted its entire earthly life to this couple. And then this couple decides, we're just going to kill you. We're just gonna destroy this body that you've worked so hard to come into, and remove your chances of having this opportunity. And it's not just anybody doing it. It's not an enemy that's doing this, right? It's your own parents. According to Dante's Inferno, which is fictional, but it's a good idea, right? Dante's Inferno, there are multiple levels of hell, and the deepest and darkest level of hell is reserved for people who betray others. And I have to think that the absolute worst form of betrayal has to be the person or people, the mother and the father, who are entrusted to look after and nurture and keep this person safe and help this person to grow. It's those exact people that murder the child. Like, that's, in my opinion, it's like the worst of the worst. And according to psychologists, this is actually a psychological idea that betrayal is the lowest level of hell, because betrayal is the most emotionally damaging thing that you can do to somebody, because it's the person that they trusted, it's the person that they thought was a friend, that was supposed to be helping them, actually stab them in the back. It's like the most harmful. And something else you find in the spiritual literature is that when an abortion occurs, the child knows. Remember that the spirit of that baby is more in the spiritual world than in the physical world. So he is aware. He or she is completely aware and sees it happening, knows that it's happening, and is, in most cases, like begging his parents, don't do this, don't do this to me. And there's one of the Andre Luis books that is just brutal. It just goes in, it tells the story of a woman who has an abortion and the trauma that the spirit of the child went through. And actually, right afterwards, the spirit was so angry, the spirit of the child, that he actually basically murdered the mother in return, which is something that if you understand demon possession, you know that spirits can affect human beings in a negative way if they choose to. Well, if you have the spirit of a new child, maybe a good spirit that would forgive being murdered, but in most cases probably not. Most people would not be quick to forgive that, and so they try to get their vengeance in whatever way they can. So that was one of the Andre Luis books. I don't remember the name. If you probably could ask ChatGPT. That's Andre Luis, Luiz. It's very interesting. It's really like disturbing to see that play out. But and by the way, it does, like, society tends to shunt abortion as a woman's issue and say, oh, it's the woman's fault. It's the woman's choice / it's the woman's fault. It's the same thing. But more often than not, or at least very commonly, it's the father's fault just as much as the mother's fault, because oftentimes the fathers are pushing the woman to get an abortion, saying, yeah, you go get that abortion. Like, you have to get the abortion or I'm going to leave you. Or in some cases, even forcing them, even like physically making them under threat of violence go and get the abortion. So like it's not just the woman's fault. It's not just the woman's issue. Like, it's the father oftentimes is every bit as much to blame, if not more so. And you better believe that the spirit of that child can see that, and no crime goes unpunished. God's justice is perfect. So I hope you found that enlightening. If you have any opinions, any comments, feel free to leave them below, and I'll see you in the next one.